Lovely. No, that's absolutely fine. Thank you, everybody, and good morning. So my name is Samar Baghi, and I'm Professor of Planning at the Kent School of Architecture and Planning, and this is Valuing Value, Valuing Sustainability. Before I do that, I thought I'd give you a quick outline. I know I've spoken at the Chamber's events and the construction forums events on the architecture and planning school. So planning is new to the University of Kent. We're just coming up to two years old. We're about to graduate our first cohort this month. The school itself is under a couple of decades old, so we're climbing up the rankings, and we're doing well year on year. And you've got the link there for more information. And then what I thought I'd do is tell you a little bit about one of our more interesting new projects, which is the Creative Estuaries, part of the broader Thames Estuary. And our work is with the Thames Estuary Production Corridor. And as a school, we are running what's known to the outside world, or maybe the inside world, I don't know, as Spark 5, which is an Arts Council funded work, but it's cultural co-location and effectively looking at cultural activities, placemaking, and embedding arts and culture into design. And we're developing best guidance practices, but also working hands-on with the teams at Ebbsfleet, at the Garden City, with Kevin and his team, and with Stephen and his team in Thurrock. So we've got a couple of pilots kicking off, and this is a 2-year project which started last month, so beginning of September for us as a school. So watch this space for more information. Right, what are we here to do today? So valuing value, valuing sustainability. So this started out as a blog I wrote during lockdown, and I thought, well, let me try and see if I can tease out the ideas a little bit more. So hopefully all of this will make sense to you. And I come at this from 3 points of view, probably. From a planning point of view, where I mostly sit, from a surveying and valuation point of view. I'm also a fellow of the RICS, but also from a climate action / net zero. And I come at it again from my role as a councillor in Brighton and Hove, and I'm sitting currently on the Climate Assembly Advisory Board. So putting all of these things together alongside lockdown and COVID, I thought, right, let's see what we could do with all of this, or what I could do with all of this. So one of the things that I think most of us have seen, and probably most of you have seen, is that investors and funders and commercial real estate and others suddenly have an increasing interest in net zero. Certainly BlackRock has, and other main investors in commercial real estate and in infrastructure. And it's interesting. Now, I can see why they would do that. I could see why, for their own internal purposes and for their own carbon footprint, they would do that. I could see the multilateral development banks doing that, partly because they want to green all of their brown investments and so on. And then I was drawn this week. I think there was an article in the East Asian News, which is pandemic seriously narrows junior bankers' exit options. And I think it features in the FT as well. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Well, by greening your brown investments, you're kind of opening up a new route for your junior bankers, because they normally would go to commercial real estate. They can now go into sustainability and net zero. So that's one thought I'd like us to park and maybe come back to later on. The other one is COVID-19 as an accelerator of good. And we've seen quite a lot of stuff, from everything from the cycled superhighways to the 20-minute neighborhoods and so on. And all of those ideas that I think, gathered momentum over the last 6 months. And there's even a piece in The Guardian today, I think, 4 key ideas on what the future city could look like. Nothing on delivery, nothing about you'd finance all of that, but at least the ideas are there. And then this last idea is the finance industry about to save the planet? Now, that obviously, there's a whole lot of activity there from, driven by our own climate change committee, but also I think globally, the Global Infrastructure Hub, which is part of the G20, the Principles for Responsible Investment, the Green Climate Bonds, and so on. So there's a whole area of activity, which I think remains a mystery to most of us in local government. So I think we're going to need a bit more time to untangle that so that it begins to make sense. Okay, so this pandemic seriously narrows junior bankers' exits options. So the story this week went on, you got the first line, it went on something like this. If you're a junior investment bank and you're getting tired of putting in the long hours, working from home, etc., in the past, you had options. Stick with it. Work in corporate development, work in strategy consulting, or mostly equity commercial real estate. Private equity option appears to have closed the way some of the markets are behaving. And I think what's now opening up is this idea of green investments. So that's one area of work where finance probably have a stronger, not grasp or foothold, but actually positioning than say, the likes of us in built environment, for example. And I think, and I'm going to come back to this point at the end, it's who works in the urban agenda. So hold that thought for now as well. And then the other point, which comes up, and, it came up during COVID, obviously, climate change as serious as the coronavirus. And I think there's a lot of polling from Ipsos Murray and others on this that, people want the environmental gains we are seeing now and we saw during lockdown to continue. And that's some of the driving forces behind the government's tranche 1, tranche 2 funding for walking and cycling and so on, even though they're also generating quite a lot of local opposition. Climate action will soak up lost jobs. I mean, we remain to see that. I mean, certainly if you speak to Julie and the folks at the UK GBC, they are very, very optimistic. Alders Gate Group as well do cover a lot of ground here. But again, we're not seeing any mass production. We focus on modular construction and on one level. But I think I've not seen the debate shift more than that. So because of that, I think we all need to be more firmly in this all-in moment. I think we all need to sit down together. So across built environment, finance, investment, valuation, and it's something I'm going to come back to, and actually figure out a way forward. Because things like carbon pricing, they're important. Not a lot of people understand it yet. We know what the costs of benefits are. But also, if you put that alongside green bonds, for example, certainly, if you talk to Sean Kidney at the Climate Bonds Initiative, they'll tell you, well, demand is rising. That's fine. If you then talk to colleagues at local authorities and you say, well, why haven't you issued a green bond? They go, well, we don't know how to go about it. So I think there is still a mismatch in what the environment is producing. Now, that third point, which is the finance industry about to save the planet? Well, I don't know. I mean, there is a rise of ESG funds, and you see that there on the left-hand side. Certainly, ESG is big these days. If you talk to the PRI, Fiona Reynolds at the PRI Institute as well. If you talk to KPMG, they've done a lot of webinars. They were doing a weekly Wednesday webinar during lockdown. I think they're back doing that now. MasterCard, Visa, they're all talking ESG. The Asia Financial Times reported only 5 days ago, that revolution goes from loud to very loud, day by day. And then The Economist weighed in early on in lockdown. This is April, I think, midway through April. And they said, just by today's fundraising, bankers, regulators, you might think the industry are about to save the planet. And that's where that idea comes from. And it kind of, that thought, the finance industry saving the planet, gathered momentum during COVID. So we've got, as built environment professionals, some territory to reclaim here. So where are we today? The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are important to all of us, in local authorities, in people who work in development, in poverty alleviation, in climate change, in cities, in resilience. But again, they're also attracted the attention of investors. And, you know, ethical finance, the summit kicks off next week with a big section on the sustainable development goals. And I think, you know, if I speak to my colleagues at the local authorities, they say, well, yes, we know about the sustainable development goals, we know, but that's something for, you know, central government to report on. And I said, no, actually, any action, any project, anything we do locally, if we map that against SDGs, then actually that's a good way forward, because then it becomes easier for us to talk to those international investors who want to invest in this field. So there is a benefit to us doing that. Okay. So work more closely together. And this theme of collaboration, I think I'm gonna come back to over and over again. So industry, finance, built environment. And then this idea of valuing sustainability, you know, so sustainability has been around since quite a long time. You know, if you go back to Rio in 1992, and the Earth Summit, we've got COP26 didn't happen this year, it's happening again next year. So there's a much better understanding, I think, today than 30 years ago of what sustainability is. But the idea of putting a value, a number on sustainability, i.e. what is the value uplift when you invest in sustainability, remains elusive. And we haven't got, at least I haven't seen, you know, the tools that allow us to kind of mark that value, because then we can explain it better to people. We can sell it better to local residents and businesses and so on. And I think that's important. The UK GBC, the Green Building Council, they've got a task group. Renewable energy procurement is a big part. How you procure, I think, becomes a big part of how you then value. And you go back to the idea of social value. And I think embedding social value in your procurement principles so that you can then maximize impact, maximize profit, and then tie up to the schemes that are happening elsewhere. The GFI, the Green Finance Institute, very Westminster centric, but I think there is hope for them yet. So they just issued recently a draft Green Home Retrofit Principles. The issue remains with that, and I was on a climate resilience working group meeting with young local authority team yesterday, and the team behind the net zero retrofit guide. It still is difficult to sell a net zero development property, house, building at planning. A, when you haven't got the policies, but B, when you can't really convince developers that that's the right way forward, or even convince local authorities that in their own developments they should actually meet those criteria. But there's a lot of interest, you know, certainly PwC through their cities team doing a lot of work. But again, it still is more tilted towards the finance industry, and so rather than built environment per se. Sustainability engineers, and I think we're too probably diverse as a group between the building engineers on one side, you know, very heavy engineering driven, and then, you know, planners on the other side, you know, more social science based, and then designers and valuers. So I think we've got a bit more to do on that collaboration piece. So what's that relationship between sustainability and value? Well, we know that people like good neighborhoods with parks, gardens, local shops, low-rise developments. The government yesterday said, oh, we're going to apply the housing standard to permitted development homes. Yes, but we don't have a kickoff date for that. That's only one part of the problem. Savills did work years ago on, you know, how sustainable neighborhoods tend to provide more value for residents, but also retain more value over time for them, so you can actually get more for your money. If you live in somewhere that has a garden and a local shop nearby and a park in the middle, and so on. And then we can look at sustainability measures, whether it's, you know, an allotment, a PV cell, a EON monitoring the house. So the Berkeley homes in Kidbrooke have got one of those developments, modular developments, where they're actually measuring energy use and so on. So all of these things are there, and we're beginning some data coming through from developments, but they're a small part of the building stock, and that remains a challenge. In terms of property valuation, so this is also tricky. So, obviously the Red Book is there. There's a big debate in the RSES whether the Red Book continues to be fit for purpose, and there's, you can fall on either side of that debate. But actually, when you look at that financial value add resulting from sustainability, whether it's a new build or sustainability improvements as retrofit, it's then difficult to get a number that would then say what that uplift in property value is. And that's because we don't have that quantitative information for that particular building yet easily available. Data is more readily available, but also it's the way we collect the data. You send out to surveyors, they look at comparable information. They might struggle to find sustainable building examples nearby to collect that information. But again, that limitation continues to affect how we value. The valuation community itself is not fully engaged around energy efficiency and other parts of the sustainability agenda. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And if you look, a surveyor coming out to value would look at Rightmove, Zoopla, others look at transactions, and this is what they'd look for. They'd look for something that is comprehensive, ideally a number of comparables rather than a single transaction, so that, you've got more of more figures to come back to when you're looking at a particular building. You'd look at whether a building is identical to the item, building, office block or house that you're valuing. And then you want something that's recent, obviously representative, but also verifiable and practical. And the challenge here is that if you want to fashion estimates of value for something which is green or sustainable, because of the lack of comparables, very similar or recent, possibly verifiable, it becomes a problem. So we can't pinpoint that value uplift. And I think this is one of those areas where, that collaboration piece needs to come into its own being, with everybody, because that empirical evidence is gathering. It's there, but it sits in multiple locations. So that's and you can get that across market, because we've got actors now operating across multiple markets. Mark Carney is waded into the debate, and he's been actually in that debate with the financial climate-related financial disclosures for firms, but he's now sort of saying, well, look, let's look at values above valuation, i.e. how will that value change? I think we might be looking at a shift, which takes us back to that point whether the Red Book continues to be fit for purpose, because I think the ground is shifting as that thinking process goes on. Valuations have suffered a decline, yes, but that's because the market itself is shifting and the traditional drivers of value have also changed. So we need to figure out, I think we also need to do that collectively, what those new values are and what people value will converge if we know what people value. Now, you could say, well, social value, yes, it's a big driver in procurement. Fine, and it's gaining traction in local authorities, but how many people out there actually know about that? So again, one of those issues to think about. So I think, so to try and wrap up with some concluding thoughts, and I think these things, like everything else, will take time. 5 years ago, 2014, 2015, resilience was not a major risk that any mayor, city leader worried about, or certainly anything that a government worried about. It was mostly a civil contingencies matter, it's something far away, cities don't need to deal with that. I think, recently we've discovered, and everybody probably agrees, that cities are the drivers where all of these things happen. It's now a crowded space, in that area: resilience, energy transition, net zero, retrofits, finance, disclosures, decarbonization. And when you add COVID as another layer on top of that, it's a huge challenge moving forward. But I think there is somewhere in that field something that we can talk about, retrofit. Why can't architects and planners get their act together? Design reviews, are they fit for purpose? Do they provide the answers that local authorities want? Probably not, but I think that's also something worth coming back to looking at the actors that create that little composition. You can't innovate unless you have the right people. Who the right people are, I think, is a subject of debate, you know, everything from skills through further education, through universities, but also the diversity of the workforce. And yesterday, apologies, it appeared that, or it appears that further English devolution has been shelved. So in the absence of that, you know, what else can we do so that, you know, we don't get overrun by algorithms, as we know it probably is not a good thing with hindsight. You know, but you know, even the people working on the algorithm tell us, well, actually, no, we're still doing stuff hands-on, then that's actually reassuring. But that's another one of those things that could kind of come through the back door in a way, and we need to be aware of that. Certainly, just to kind of shift gear very quickly, 5G became a big issue for lockdown. We as a council, I struggled with masts coming through, but you know, thick and fast. And then I discovered that actually my local authority does not have a mast register, so you cannot actually fight these things quite, you know, as actively as you'd like. But again, 5G is important. Where does that debate sit? That debate's about, well, what people want, amenity, visual or otherwise, but also data, future workspace, accessibility to internet at home, because, you know, working from home, we all need that. So all of those debates need to happen somewhere. And I think collaboratively, it's a big space, but I think, you know, value is one of them, valuation is one of them, but we cannot escape the other things that are coming at us. And I will stop there, Molly. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. We've had a couple questions in the chat here, actually, if you're happy to answer some. So we've had one here from DLS. It's quite a long question. I don't know if you're happy to unmute, if you'd like to ask the staff, or would you like me to ask it to this group? No, that's okay. So it says, at a time when cost is a high priority, how do you drive down costs of zero carbon and retrofitting? Also, would it be better to provide all electricity, for example, as green energy? If you currently compare green energy providers, they appear more expensive, but are they trying to recover the cost of new developing technologies too quickly, or simply using the green agenda to charge more?
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one. I think there's a broader question here about infrastructure, isn't there? And I think we need to look at people's individual experiences. I'm happy to share mine with you know, I think like everybody else, you know, I was bombarded with letters trying to get me to switch to a smart meter, and I resisted, partly because the minute I changed to that smart meter, my off-peak tariffs are going to change, you know, and I thought, well, I can't do that. And if that's one way of you recovering cost, the cost of installing that smart meter through, you know, some sort of macro means, then that's fine. I wasn't interested. But then I had a conversation, and I think I'm getting that done next week, which means I'm without internet for half a day. but I can live with that. But I think these are all big concerns. Certainly, the scheme that I mentioned, the role of terraced houses in Kidbrooke, which are modular, which are managed by Ian or monitoring by Ian for consumption. You know, they've got all of the right tools. I mean, even the canopies that they have on the top floor, it's a very compact design, I must admit, so it's probably not to everybody's taste. But, you know, even the canopies that are on a roof terrace and everything which is glass on the outdoors effectively operates as a PV cell as well. You know, you'd have to buy into something like that. But then I think more importantly, you need to have something like that clearly explained to you so that you know exactly what you're getting yourself into, you know, what are you getting in return, where the savings are, how long are those savings going to be? Because I think we need those lessons, especially if we're going to be doing more of that. Now, the challenge of driving down retrofit costs is a different one, because that depends on, you know, your existing stock. And I think it depends what sort of inventory of stock you have, whether you're a local authority or a housing association or a housing provider and so on. Certainly, I think people have learned lessons. And if you take Ebbsfleet, for example, the Clarion developments from 10 years ago are very different from the Clarion developments of last year, and certainly the ones we were out on a walkabout on Friday last week, the ones that are currently being finished. I'm not sure they're there yet in terms of zero carbon, but actually you could see over time how the design is better and how it probably becomes easier to incorporate some of those energy saving examples into them. I think it's just probably going to take longer than all of us hope it will take. The challenge then is for local authorities that have a net zero by 2030 is how do you pick up the pace, and Canterbury is one of those, Brighton is one of those. It's a challenge. Do you tell them that it's practically impossible?
Yeah.
Or do you let them get on with it? I think that just shows you the scale of that challenge.
Yeah, I can imagine. And we've had another question here. How influential should be the well building standard? Longer term value or lower life cycle building costs? Yeah,
I like the well building standard and the work that the Well Institute does. I'm actually sitting on a 50% discount to register for the exam myself. It's very technical. If you've looked at that, it's very technical. So in a way, if you are going to go down that route as an individual, as a professional, it's a lot of effort to understand that. And I did 6 weeks of that kind of briefing on it over the summer during lockdown. I don't know. It gathered momentum for a while because they were doing quite a few webinars as well. It's kind of slowed down a bit now, but there are, I think, people who are pushing heavily for well to be adopted across the board. And certainly the Harvard School of Public Health is a big advocate of that. In terms of real estate development, the Dutch are also pushing well through, if people have come across the Edge real estate developers, which are Amsterdam based, but they develop these unique buildings called the Edge County. There's one in Amsterdam Olympic in West Amsterdam. There's one coming to London Bridge as well, but they're uniquely designed buildings. And they're unique in that they're designed to be net zero, but they're also designed with software in mind, so that software monitors performance of the building itself, but it also measures comforts of users and so on, and well is integrated into that mechanism. So on its own, it's probably not as influential or as valuable as it could be. I think the minute we start integrating that into how we build and monitor, then it becomes more interesting. So this morning I was reading that there's a developer that's becoming a software company, and that's actually interesting because you could see that the way you develop a building and monitor it is probably the future. And I think integrating well into that. So you look at comfort, health, you look at light levels, you've got these units that measure air quality and so on. And I think COVID gave that a driver, so it's certainly picking up.
Should the net zero and well building agendas be complementary?
Well, if you look at the Edge buildings, then they are, but like I said, that's a uniquely Dutch experience. And I think just looking at something their CEO, Koen van Oostrom, put on Twitter this morning, I think they're also setting up their own, sorry, just taking a quick look myself, because I know I replied to him on something. Certainly they've created this thing called Edge Next, which I think is that next generation of integrating that. It's the software that effectively drives, I think, the net zero monitoring, because they build to be net zero or they retrofit for net zero, but then it's the continued monitoring over the lifetime of the building itself. So there is, and it links into, well, there is a facilities management dimension to this, which we mustn't forget. And I think Leesman are starting to do an index. They're doing an index for working from home, but actually there's nothing that says where you can't actually index things like net zero and well as you begin to monitor the performance of the buildings over time. But you could see if we're doing that, we're going to be it's going to take us a while to actually make sure that every single building we have actually benefits from that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. That was really informational. Great session. I can see there might be one more question, but unfortunately we have run out of time. I don't know if you'd be happy to perhaps put your email address in the chat or something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will do that, and like I said, this is an area that's of growing interest to me as well, partly because I sit across all of these things, and we're going to try and get the school and the University of Kent to do a bit more in the space, and maybe, we could do something through our estuary work, but also I think if there are people here who find this interesting, then I'd love to talk to colleagues across Kent and see what we could do. So I'm gonna I'll put in the university email, and then happy to hear back from anybody.
That's brilliant. And if you have any other information that you'd like to hand out, we will have a resources page as well. So feel free to send them to me, and then I can include them for anyone to see as a follow-up.
Perfect. Well. And feel free to share the PowerPoint if you want, Molly. You've got a copy yourself, haven't you?
Perfect. So, yeah, I'll put that up and the recording as well for anyone that may have missed your session. Excellent. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.